Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Syria. Like everyone else, I'm thinking about what happened in Syria and what will happen in Syria in the future. Since the fall of Assad, I have been deluged with questions. If I had a penny for every time someone asked me to predict the future of Syria, I would be a rich man. As the pressure was building against Bashar Assad, he gathered 30 of his most loyal generals in his Ministry of Defense. As reported by the New York Post, according to a source who attended the meeting, Assad told them not to worry. He told them to continue fighting hard. Help is on the way. The Russians are coming. Assad left his generals and the defense ministry and flew to a Russian base in Syria on the Mediterranean coast. From there, he was swiftly, safely, and secretly airlifted to somewhere in Russia. There is very little doubt that the entire world, the region, and especially Syria, are better because the Assad dynasty has been toppled. That does not mean that Syria has been transformed into Shangri-La and all is bliss. Quite the opposite. In fact, it just means that nothing could be as bad as it was under the Assads. What will happen next is not too much of a mystery. There are only a few realistic scenarios, given the fact that the groups that toppled Assad are former ISIS and al-Qaeda terrorists. Certainly, the goal that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken articulated is a pipe dream at best, and maybe just delusional. Blinken was on an unscheduled visit to Baghdad. He met with Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani. According to a State Department spokesperson, Blinken said that they were looking for a, quote, a Syrian-led political process resulting in an inclusive and representative civil government, unquote. Frankly, that will not come to fruition soon, if ever. It's nearly impossible. Assad was a butcher, as was his father. At the rate that they murdered and tortured, it's hard to distinguish who was more ruthless. Syria is now in the throes of a violent power struggle between groups. In the end, Iran ran away, and Russia did not come to save Assad, not in Syria. They needed to escape to save themselves. Syrians stormed the Iranian embassy and their offices. The only outside force active in the Syrian power struggle right now is Turkey. Turkey is currently the mayhem and using the mayhem to wreak as much damage as possible on the Kurds of Syria. Turkey firmly believes that the Kurds of Syria and the Kurds of Turkey are terrorists. Blinken was actually in the region to intervene on behalf of the Kurds of Syria. He was blunt and asked Turkey to lay off. The reason for U.S. diplomatic intervention is very simple. The Kurds of Syria function as a major bulwark against reconstituting ISIS and al-Qaeda in the entire region. The U.S. supports the Kurds wholeheartedly, and there are actually 900 plus U.S. troops on the ground working in Syria with the Kurds. As an aside, there are thousands of soldiers and intel officers on U.S. bases around the world giving support to those 900 soldiers and the Kurds in Syria. There is little possibility that those who brought down Assad will be able to coalesce and unite. The common enemy was Assad. That united them. Although, interestingly, the Kurdish fighters, known as the Syrian Defense Forces, or the SDF, took over the city of Deir az-Zor in eastern Syria, and they handed it over to the largest terror group that ousted Assad, known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. That's their new name. Because of their ruthlessness over the decades, both Assads sowed deep division in Syria. They fostered those divisions, creating tremendous hatred and deep-rooted yearning for vengeance towards the Assad regime and their cohorts. The Russians, and especially the Iranians, fed into this leadership of torture and terror. The Assad family is Alawite, which is a break-off from Shiite Islam. They are officially only 11% of the population of about 22 million, though that number is probably exaggerated. 70% of Syrians are Sunni and 9% are Kurds. The tiny minority Alawite Assads, with the assistance of the Shiite Iranians, use their family and tribe to wreak horror on the massive majority, the Sunnis. That explains why Sunni ISIS and Sunni Al-Qaeda were so committed to ousting Assad. As one official at the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps said, and this is a quote, "This is the fall of the Axis' Berlin Wall. In 11 days, we lost everything we fought for 13 years, unquote. The death toll is still mounting. Here, too, the numbers are not reliable. The UN says that there have been 600,000 casualties since the civil war began in 2011. UN reports that as of the beginning of 2024, 7.4 million Syrians remain internally displaced, with approximately 4.9 seeking refuge in neighboring countries and another additional 1.3 million found refuge in Europe. If correct, over 2/3 of the population of Syria are refugees. That number is staggering. Given the players, the future in Syria will be violent. The best scenario, and there is a small possibility of a best scenario, is that after the dust settles, the new Syrian leadership will survey the landscape and conclude that it is better to live next to Israel with security and safety than to try to destroy the Jewish state. It's not a democracy, it's not peace, but at least it's not a constant state of war. Coming up next, points of view. First up is an address delivered by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the people of Iran. It is brief, about 2.5 minutes. I have placed it in the column section because it is a point of view. The Israeli leader is making his case and his point. He knows that the Iranian regime will be toppled, and after that he is convinced that Israel and Iran will be allies. Watch Bibi plead his case. I find his message eloquent and convincing. I hope that the Iranian people do also. We also know that millions of Iranians actually watched the Bibi speech.
People of Iran, as we see history unfold before our very eyes, I can only imagine what you're feeling right now. Your oppressors spent over $30 billion supporting Assad in Syria. Today, after only 11 days of fighting, his regime collapsed into the dust. Your oppressors spent billions supporting Hamas in Gaza. Today, their regime lies in ruins. Your oppressors spent over $20 billion supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon. In a matter of weeks, most of Hezbollah's leaders, its rockets, and thousands of its terrorists went up in smoke. The money your oppressors stole from you literally went up in smoke. You must be furious imagining the new roads, schools, hospitals that could have been built with the tens of billions of dollars your dictators wasted backing terrorists who lose over and over and over again. Do you know why Iran's oppressors keep losing? It's not only because they're incompetent and cruel. They are. It's because they seek to conquer other nations, to impose fundamentalist tyranny on the Middle East, on the entire world. The only thing Israel seeks is to defend our state. But in so doing, we're defending civilization against barbarism. The historic events we witness today are a chain reaction to the pounding of Hamas, the decimation of Hezbollah, the targeting of Nasrallah, the blows we delivered to the Iran regime's axis of terror. And all this came, as President Trump pointed out this week, because of Israel and its fighting success. I want to make clear, Israel wants peace. We want peace with all those who truly want peace with us. And I have no doubt that you, the people of Iran, know this. I know that just as we want peace with you, you want peace with us. But you suffer under the rule of a regime that subjugates you and threatens us. You know what this regime is truly terrified of? It's terrified of you, the people of Iran. And one day, I know that, one day this will change. One day Iran will be free. Women, life, freedom, zan, zandagi, azadi. That is the future of Iran. That is the future of peace. And I have no doubt that we will realize that future together a lot sooner than people think. I know, and I believe, we will transform the Middle East into a beacon of prosperity, progress, and peace. Thank you.
This is not the first Bibi address to the Iranian people. All of them are very familiar in content and length. It's very real. His presentation, I hope the Iranian people will realize this and realize his sincerity. Next up is a column, Interview, from the Wall Street Journal, published on December 13th, and it's with Ron Dermer, Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs. He's probably Netanyahu's closest advisor. Ron and I used to play softball and then basketball together every Friday, depending on the season. This went on for years. The Wall Street Journal has these interview columns all the time. This one is by Barton Swain. It is long and exceptional. I highly recommend that you read the entire piece. It's entitled, How Israel Turned the Middle East Around. Subtitled, 6 months ago, the Jewish state was weakened and demoralized. No longer. Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer discusses what America can learn. This is how Swain begins. No one knows whether the new Syrian government will generate fresh trouble or find its way to peace and stability. That the fall of the House of Assad is an inherently good thing, however, is certain. For more than 50 years under the Hafez al-Assad and since 2000 under his son Bashar, the Syrian government has brutalized the country's citizens and allied itself with malign regimes around the globe. Two nations deserve most of the credit for Assad's fall, and alas, they do not include the United States. They are Ukraine and Israel. For preoccupying Vladimir Putin's Russia, and Israel for preventing Iran's intervention by degrading Tehran's military and humiliating its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah. Swain now introduces Dermer. He grew up in Miami Beach. Actually, his father and brother were mayors. Swain writes, in a noisy corner of the Willard Hotel's lobby, a block from the White House, Ron Dermer and I exchanged pleasantries about the American Southeast. He grew up in Miami Beach, and I in South Carolina's upstate. Mr. Dermer is Israel's Minister for Strategic Affairs, and among his country's more articulate Anglophone exponents. Dermer now puns using the famous big Satan, little Satan analogy. I begin by mentioning my view that Israel is fighting America's war in the Middle East. He doesn't surprise me by agreeing. We're the little Satan, Mr. Dermer says. America is the big Satan. And the Prime Minister often says, he's referring to his boss, Benjamin Netanyahu, Europe's annoyed because it's only the middle-sized Satan. Now Swain shows a little of Dermer's caustic and biting humor as he compares Europe to Israel and the United States. Swain writes, Mr. Dermer, 53, was Israel's ambassador to the United States from 2013 to 2021 and tried to kill the Obama administration's nuclear agreement with Iran. That effort failed, but his skepticism of Iran deal has been vindicated 1,000 times over. Mr. Netanyahu's middle-sized Satan wisecrack is a good one, but Dermer notes a serious point. A lot of people don't understand, he says. They think America is hated because of Israel. I think Israel is hated because of America. We're seen as the extension of your values, and guess what? They're right. Swain continues explaining how Israel regained its reputation. The obvious inverse the reader must probe himself is that what about the reputation of the U.S.? He writes, a few weeks later, in an exploit you might dismiss as impossible if you read it in the Robert Ludlum novel, the Israelis detonated the pagers and walkie-talkies carried by thousands of Hezbollah operatives, devices that had been sold to Hezbollah by a fake company set up years earlier by Israel for such a time as this. In late September, an Israeli airstrike killed Hezbollah's Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah. And 2 weeks later, an Israeli patrol in Gaza killed the legendary elusive Yahya Sinwar, architect of the October 7th attack. We have no choice, Mr. Dermer says. He makes the point with a joke. So I hear you have issues with Canada and Mexico. I'll tell you what, we'll take Canada and you can have Syria. We'll take Mexico and you can have any other country in the Middle East. Dermer uses humor with the famous big 800-pound gorilla metaphor. This is how Swain writes it up. As Mr. Dermer points out, however, the case for optimism has to reckon with Sunni radicalism. You had Al-Qaeda, that was 1.0. ISIS was 2.0. And you'll have a 3.0, and you might see the beginnings of a 3.0 in whatever comes out of Syria. But he says, switching the metaphor, let's say you're one of the Gulf states and you're worried about the Sunni radical jihadists. You look around and you see the 800-pound gorilla has left the building. So you look around and you see, well, there's a 250-pound gorilla with a kippah on. Maybe you'll work with him. Dermer now uses the best retort to the genocide canard that Israel is mass murdering Palestinians. He says, Mr. Dermer constantly interrupts himself with stories and wisecracks. And here's one. By the way, the Jews must be the dumbest genocidal force in history. We win Nobel Prizes, but we're idiots when it comes to genocide. The Palestinian population is about 10 times what it was in 1948. Dermer now proceeds to explain why Netanyahu was successful in withstanding the international or U.S. pressure. He uses the word no. Dermer avoids direct criticism of the Biden administration, though he praises Netanyahu for not bowing to international pressure, meaning from Washington. One of the most important things an Israeli prime minister is to say one word: no. In conclusion, Dermer emphatically explains what strength is and what victory is. He says, Israel is going to win, and the U.S. should join Israel in the victory. Swain writes, how to regain deterrence at the end of all that? Dermer has an answer. When the U.S. is part of a victory, it projects strength. He interrupts himself. I'll be diplomatic, and I won't get into what happens when you are perceived as weak, or how that might affect other theaters. I'll just say, Israel's war is a theater in which we are going to win, and America can win with it. So be part of the victory. An excellent column, an excellent interview from the Wall Street Journal. I highly recommend that you read the entire piece. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 4 cartoons and 1 meme today. We will start with the meme. Assad is saying, I killed over 500,000 Arabs, but nobody cares because I'm not a Jew. These next 4 cartoons are an international array of cartoons lampooning Assad. The second item is entitled Putin-Assad Alliance and Asylum by Paresh Nath from The Independent in India. Putin is catching Assad and saying, and when your regime started to fall, I chose to catch you. That's a powerful and damning critique. Next is also about Assad's fall, and he lands on Putin's head. It's entitled The Fall by Joop Bertems, and that's from the Netherlands. This cartoon is in the shape of Syria. The map is in the shape of Syria. And it's from an Arabic paper in London entitled Syria Assad Free Map Rebels Map Victory by Ahmad Hajjaj, published by Al-Arabi Al-Jadid in London. The rebels squeezed Assad and his head popped off. And finally, for today, Putin and Assad are sitting together in Russia, and Putin asks, I thought all Syrian refugees could go back home now. And that cartoon is by Tom Jansen, also from the Netherlands. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Israel's Minister of Justice, Yariv Levin, requested that Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara open an investigation into remarks by former state prosecutor Moshe Lador, alleging they amounted to incitement to military insurrection. Calls for disobedience, whether in peacetime or wartime, constitute a clear and severe violation of the law, Levin wrote, adding that such statements are especially grave when made by a figure who once shaped the state's prosecution policies. Lador had stated earlier that pilots whose service is voluntary must tell the state that if it becomes a dictatorship, they will not enter the cockpit. That is powerful. This item made me laugh. Palestinian gunmen launched violent protests in the West Bank cities decrying operations by Palestinian security forces targeting terror groups in the area. Demonstrators blocked roads, burned tires, marched through cities including Jenin, the town of Tubas near Nablus, and Silat al-Dahar, a village nearby. Earlier in the day, clashes erupted between the Palestinian armed terrorists and the Palestinian PA security forces in Tulkarem, where protesters accused the PA security forces of being traitors. The protesters are terrorists, violently opposing the PA forces attempting to rein them in and stop the terror. Abu Muhammad al-Golani, aka Jolani, is pronounced differently depending on your Arabic dialect, Golani or Jolani. He is the leader of the Syrian rebel faction, formerly known as Jabhat al-Nusra, addressed Israel for the first time since the fall of Bashar Assad's regime, rejecting the country's involvement in Syria. Speaking in a televised statement, Golani said, "Syria needs laws and state institutions. We have a plan to address all these crises, and we are gathering information. We are not entering into conflict with Israel." Golani claimed Israel has no justification for involvement in Syria following the departure of Iranian forces. He said, "What happened is a victory over the Iranian plan, which threatened the entire region." Golani also suggested his faction could have targeted Russian bases in Syria, but opted instead to build good relations with the Russians. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi dismissed claims by Syrian rebel leader Abu Muhammad al-Golani that Israel has no justification for its involvement in Syria, saying that the IDF's actions along the border are solely to ensure Israel's security. Halevi, speaking during a situational assessment on the Golan Heights with senior military officials, said, "We are not interfering in what is happening inside Syria, nor do we intend to govern it. However, we are unequivocally involved in ensuring the security of Israeli citizens living in the communities behind us in the Golan Heights. This is something we are handling with professionalism, determination, and precision." Halevi's comments followed statements made by Golani. Halevi said, referring to the IDF's ongoing presence near the border, "We are here to protect the Golan Heights, northern Golan and Mount Hermon. Syria was once an enemy state. Its army has collapsed, and there is a real threat that terrorist elements will try to establish themselves near our border. We have acted decisively to prevent extremist groups from settling right next to us." A report by the Henry Jackson Society, a conservative think tank, alleges that casualty figures from Hamas in Gaza during the war were exaggerated to portray Israel as deliberately targeting civilians. This was reported by the media outlet The Telegraph. HJS researchers assert that the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry does not differentiate between combatants and civilians in its death toll, and includes deaths from natural causes, illnesses, and even fatalities predating the war. The report also accuses the ministry of inflating the number of women and children killed. This is an important report, but it is not new news to anyone who has been following the situation. IDF Arabic language spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Avichai Adrei, released surveillance footage from 2023 showing Hamas prison guards abusing Palestinian inmates in Gaza's Al-Katiba prison. The footage, recovered by the IDF and Shin Bet, depicts guards brutally beating a prisoner and throwing him down the flight of stairs. Quote, "Hamas tries to distance itself from the Assad regime and its prison atrocities, but these videos, along with previously exposed torture investigations, leave no doubt Hamas is no less brutal," unquote. This was in an IDF statement. Russia is pulling back its military from the front lines in northern Syria and from posts in the Alawite Mountains, but is not leaving its two main bases in the country after the fall of President Bashar Assad, 4 Syrian officials told Reuters, "The ousting of Assad, who, along with his late father, former President Hafez al-Assad, have forged a close alliance with Moscow, has thrown the future of Russian bases, the Khamimim air base in Latakia and the Tardis naval facility in Tardis, into question." Satellite footage shows what appears to be at least 2 Antonov AN-124s among the world's largest cargo planes at the Khamimim air base, with their nose cones open, apparently preparing to load up. At least 1 cargo plane flew out for Libya, a Syrian security official stationed outside the facility reported. The Lebanese Hezbollah-affiliated Al-Mayadeen network reports concerns that in Syria, the Tarshin Dam over the Euphrates in the north might collapse because of damage between the fighting between the Kurdish rebel forces and the Turkish forces in the region. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one picante piece of information. I want to show you 3 short clips today. The first is priceless. A young Israeli father, still in the IDF uniform, returns home and presents himself to his son. The moment the son recognizes his father is inspirational. Watch his face. In the next short clip, Syrians in the port city of Tartus are seen pulling down the statue of Hafez Assad, Bashar's father. They are celebrating their freedom from the dynasty of butchers and tyrants. And finally, these young men are celebrating their return after 15 months to their yeshiva, to their school in Kiryat Shmona, near the Lebanese border. Because of the rockets coming down from Lebanon, they were removed from their school. And now they and tens of thousands of others can return to their homes in peace.
מה לך נרדם? תציל אותי.
Their joy in all these videos is palpable. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.